This video is sponsored by Classic Football Shirts, the best place to get your classic and vintage football shirts. To get cheap retro Palace shirts, click the link in the description below. And for an extra 10% off, use the code CFSPJ10 at checkout. Hello and welcome to the Crystal Palace podcast. I'm Alfonso Greenbrook, and in today's podcast, I'll be looking over the game against Newcastle by bringing you my match review, player rankings and my man of the match. As well as this, I'm also going to bring you interviews with Roy Hodgson, Andros Townsend and Luka Milivojevic after the game. So let's begin. Roy Hodgson's men had to settle for a point in the pouring rain at Selhurst Park, despite having the better of a scrappy affair. Palace were left ruined Mamadou Sakho's golden opportunity in the final 10 minutes, as the home side threw everything at the visitors, who valiantly clung on to head back to the north-east with a point. Palace went into the match with an unchanged starting 11 following their win at Huddersfield Town last week, whilst Newcastle United made 3 changes, with Rondon, Shelvey and Chelsea loanee Kennedy replacing Hoslu, Murphy and Hayden. During the warm-up there was an injury scare to Wilfried Zaha, who was seen nursing his upper back and neck area and disappeared down the tunnel for treatment, but it wasn't enough to keep him out of the side and he walked out with his teammates. The visitors won the toss and opted to change ends, meaning Palace would attack the Homestead Road end, and it was Palace who created the first opportunity as the Rangers were down in South London. In just the second minute, Andros Townsend whipped a fine cross to find James McArthur at the back stick, but the Scotsman header went just over the crossbar. In the 9th minute, Perez pickpocketed Tompkins about 40 yards from goal. As the Eagles' central defender parted, the Spaniard went through on goal and was 1-on-1 with Wayne Hennessy, but as he approached the edge of the box, the striker scuffed his lines, poking the ball tamely straight at the Welsh keeper. Palace began to up the ante and broke quickly. First Chiarte spread the ball wide to Vanano down the left, releasing Townsend, who'd swapped flanks. His cross landed at Wan-Bissaka's feet at the back post, who blasted at the oncoming defender for a corner. Moments later, the home captain Luka Milivojevic whipped a pinpoint cross into Jordan Ayew, whose header looped over the bar, but Palace piled on the pressure and Zaha was fouled on the edge of the box. Milivojevic stepped up and struck low past the wall to the keeper's left, who poured it away to safety. As the game approached the half-an-hour mark, Newcastle won back-to-back corners, with Jonjo Shelvey targeting the visitors' captain Jamal Lascelles on the penalty spot, whose dangerous presence was thwarted on both occasions. With 10 minutes to go until the break, Yedlin was bamboozled by Zaha's mazy footwork and tripped the Ivorian on the left wing, in line with the edge of the box, receiving a yellow card for his efforts. Milivojevic stepped up once again to take the dead ball from a shallow angle, and this time, his cross had the perfect pace and height as the ball sailed over the top of the black and white shirts, grazing Tompkins' thigh and onto the post. It was Palace's best and last real chance of that half. Palace headed down the tunnel, having certainly created the better chances, but to no avail. Hoslu replaced Rondon at the break, and Jonjo Shelvey's wicked free kick from the right flank fizzed across the Palace box, whilst the new man collided with Tompkins, but appeals for a penalty were waved away. Tompkins soon ended in the referee's book though, after a late challenge on Perez. On 62 minutes, Max Meyer replaced Checo Chiarte to rapturous applause. The German's early touches were assured, and he successfully found pockets of space in the middle of the park. With 20 minutes to play, both sides made changes, with Alexander Sorloth replacing Ayew and Atsu coming on for Ritchie. Palace began to pile on the pressure. Townsend switched to the left, which proved to be the catalyst for Palace's sustained pressure, and he sidestepped an on-rushing defender brilliantly, creating space for Vanano, who hesitated on striking the ball first time, before he was crowded out for space. Townsend again sprang into life as he won the ball right on the touchline and launched a looping cross that eluded the keeper, leaving Sakho free at the back post with the goal gaping, but the French centre-back headed wide of the post in Palace's best chance of the game. Palace overwhelmed the Newcastle goal, winning corner after corner, and in the dying moments Zaha flashed an effort across the box, with McArthur's outstretched boot falling astonishingly short. It was a day of what-ifs in South London, but a point is a point and Hodgson's men move on to 7 from 6 games. The wait for the 100th Premier League win continues. It was an afternoon of frustration for Crystal Palace as they were held at home by Newcastle United at Selhurst Park on Saturday. Palace had the better of the play and the better chances to win the game, but were unable to make the breakthrough as they were forced to settle for a point. But what were the talking points from the game? Here are some of them. Townsend's threat. The former Newcastle United man put in some good crosses early on from the right and caused problems for his old side. He is one of the creative forces in the Palace side, and with Wilfried Zaha quieter than normal on the opposite side for large periods of the game, he was responsible for creating some of the best opportunities for the Eagles. Indeed, it was his early cross that found James McArthur for a decent chance, and he then provided a cross for Mamadou Sakho's golden opportunity late on, which the Frenchman really should have taken. However, there were times that he was wasteful himself, with a couple of shooting opportunities going begging, as he looks to add to his tally of just 5 goals in 86 appearances for Palace. The Selhurst Park atmosphere. Once again, the homes of fanatics were not in their usual spot in Block B, and once again the atmosphere was somewhat subdued at Selhurst Park, despite a crowd of 25,679 being in attendance. The atmosphere was reflective of the weather on the day and the game in general, but the Newcastle United fans made their voices heard, singing, "Shall we sing a song for you?" to the home supporters in the first half. Newcastle fans voiced their anger at Mike Ashley. The atmosphere wasn't the only thing the Newcastle fans made their voices heard about. Newcastle owner Mike Ashley made a rare appearance in the stands at Selhurst Park to watch the Magpies, but his presence was met with anger from the travelling supporters. With the knowledge that he was in the stands, they made their feelings clear, directing their anger towards him while singing their support for manager Rafael Benítez. Drawing blanks. Crystal Palace are still searching for their first goal at home this season, with this being the first time they have failed to score in 3 consecutive home games since September 2017. And Newcastle have not fared much better so far this season, scoring the same amount of goals as Palace, with just 4 in 6 league games. This was the Magpies' second goalless draw of the campaign, following a 0-0 draw at Cardiff City. Meanwhile, there is another wait that will go on for Palace, who are looking for their 100th win in the Premier League and their 200th in the club's history in the top flight. The next opportunity for that will be against Bournemouth on Monday, October the 1st. Palace's defensive solidity in Hennessy's form. Wayne Hennessy may not have had too much to do on this occasion, with Newcastle only having 3 shots on target, all of which were routine saves for the Welshman. But this was his 4th clean sheet in his last 7 matches in the Premier League. Much of the credit for this must go to the defence, with Palace now having a settled back 4 when they are fit and available. However, Hennessy has been in form as well, and he has now kept 3 in 6 matches this season, including in his last 2 matches, and he has risen to the increased competition from summer signing Vicente Gaeta, who is still having to settle for a place on the bench. So I'm now going to move on to the player ratings, but before I start, don't forget you can follow us on Twitter and Facebook at Crystal Palace for all the latest Palace news. And also, if you're on Facebook, do feel free to join the Facebook group, which is a really great place to join in with discussions and also share your opinions with other fans. And much like a forum, it is also a great place for you to not only read what other fans are saying about the game, but also a great place for you to share your opinion by creating your own posts as well. So if you are someone like myself who likes to get involved with other fans and likes to just have discussions, whether that be about the striker situation, whether it be about what is the best formation to Palace for play basically, and that's something I'm going to cover on later on in the podcast. But if you are someone who likes to discuss things like that with other Palace fans, then of course do feel free to join our Facebook group, which is a really great place to do so. And if you are someone, once again like myself, who likes to keep up to date with all the Palace news, then of course follow us on both our Twitter and Facebook pages. And of course it's not just news on there in terms of news articles about transfers, any sort of ongoings about the club, but it's also, you know, opinions before the game, you know, what we personally think as a page, what we think about the lineup, obviously what we think generally about the game. So if you are someone who wants another Palace account to follow, then of course you can follow us on both our Twitter and Facebook accounts. Now, another great place to share your opinion is in the YouTube comments. So if you are listening to the podcast on YouTube, then do feel free to comment below with your player ratings, where you rate the players' performances from 1 to 10. Now, even if you are not interested in doing that, then just feel free to sort of comment your general views of the game, you know, where you thought Palace could have won the game, whether you think we should have done something differently, and whether, like I've said already, whether you think the formation we're playing at the minute, because we played slightly better with it, maybe that's something we should carry forth this season. But like I've said, if you are someone who wants to get involved, then of course you can start by giving your player rating so I can compare your opinion to mine and see how we thought each player's performed, and of course just your sort of general overview of the game. And mainly the main reason I want you to do this is of course so I can come back to the video and just sort of read what other fans thought and see how that compares to my own opinion. But also it's a great thing for me, or it's a great thing for other fans who come onto the video, whether they're Newcastle or Palace fans. They can come onto the video and not only listen to my views in the podcast, but also read that comment section, just to have a sort of I suppose, a general oversight as to what other fans thought about the game. Now, like I've said already, even if you're not a Palace fan, Newcastle fan, obviously you don't have to comment below with your play ratings, but I am interested to hear what you thought about the game, because both Newcastle and Palace, we haven't had the best of starts this season. Obviously Newcastle have only got 2 points, we've got 7, so it's slightly different in that respect. But in terms of performances, we both haven't been great this season, so it'd be really interesting to hear sort of their side of the story, as well as Palace's sides, because of course we haven't had the best start to the season. But if you look back to last season and compare it to that, 7 points after 6 games is better than having none after 7. So I suppose there's different ways you can look at it. But of course, just to finish off this section, if you do want to follow any of our social media pages, then of course you can obviously check links that will be in the description below, and included in that is obviously the link to the Facebook group, where you obviously will be accepted straight away, and you can go straight in there and obviously post your opinions and post any articles you find. But like I've said already, if you want to find any of these pages or join the group, then of course all the links that will be in the description below. But we're now going to move on now and start with the player ratings. I'm going to start in goal with Wayne Hennessy, and this is a player who's been very consistent this season. You know, he's kept 3 clean sheets in 6 games, and you would look at that and go, actually, you know, that's pretty good in his part. But also you've got to look at the back four for them games as well, and the back 4 and the goalkeeper for them 3 clean sheets has been the same, which just goes to show that yes, Wayne Hennessy's done good in the fact that he's kept these clean sheets, but actually the back 4 as a whole, including the goalkeeper, has done very good as well. But I'm going to give Wayne Hennessy here a 6 for the game against Newcastle, because although he was rarely troubled in the game, he did make he did deal with a couple of crosses well, and of course made some good routine saves as well. So like I've said already, he's kept 3 clean sheets already this season, which is quite impressive considering last season we weren't that great at the back. And obviously the fact that we've improved that, as well as Hennessy improving his performances, is great to see as well. Now of course, because he was rarely troubled, mainly because Newcastle only had 3 shots on target, even though that was the case when they did have them 3 shots on target, the fact that Hennessy was still able to make these saves, and that's obviously what you would expect from him, because you know, you look back at the beginning of last season, even the season before that, Hennessy was a very sort of error-prone player, and he didn't make the simple saves. He made a few good saves here and there, but he never made the simple saves. And basically all he's done this season to improve his performances, and obviously including the end of last season, all he's done is he's carried on making good saves, but he's just made sure that he can make these routine saves, and that's why his performance was so good, and that's the reason I've given him a 6, because he done nothing outstanding in the game, but the fact that he dealt with everything that was put into him, obviously including them saves, as well as a few of the crosses that came into the box, you know, he was able to deal with them relatively well. The fact that he was able to do that was of course great to see as well. Now in terms of his handling of the ball, I thought that was really good in the game, in terms of, you know, collecting the ball from crosses, as well as, you know, playing the ball out from the back. I thought he was fairly impressive doing that. And like I said already, the fact that he was able to deal with the crosses well, as well as having good kicking, because that's something which hasn't necessarily been that great this season. The fact that he was able to make saves, deal with crosses, as well as having sort of good handling and kicking of the ball, that was of course great to see. But the only reason I can't really give him a 7, as I've seen some people give him, is basically because he was barely troubled throughout the game. If he had had a few more shots on goal that he had to save or had to make blocks, then maybe I could understand him getting a 7. But basically, because Newcastle were quite poor and they didn't really trouble him, I do think a 6, you know, like I said, is a fair reflection of his game. Now just to go back onto the point I made about his kicking and his handling, you know, in the first half there was a great ball, long ball, I think it was from a goal kick. Hennessy pumped it long to Sakho. That was a lovely ball, and basically that's what we've been missing in the last few games. You know, I talked last week, and you know, quite a few games this season, in the fact that Hennessy was quite good with his distribution, but his kicking was a bit off and they kept going out for throw-ins. In this game here, I don't know whether he's worked on it during the week, whatever it was, his kicking in this game was superb. And you know, I think only one of his kicks actually went to a Newcastle player in the second half, but other than that, it was actually nice to see him attempt sort of getting the ball long and starting the counter-attack. So like I've said already, I've criticised him this season for not having great kicking, but the fact that he was able to improve his kicking in this game, and it was only one of his balls that I think that went to a Newcastle player. All of his other free kicks and goal kicks obviously went to Palace players. If you look at that, you're thinking, yeah, actually that's quite a significant improvement. So overall, Wayne Hennessy here, like I've said, he was rarely troubled, so I can't really give him anything really higher than a 6, but I do think a 6 is a fair reflection. You know, like I've said, the fact that he was able to make these simple saves, the fact that he was able to deal with crosses, as well as obviously having that improvement in kicking, I think overall is a very good performance from him. And you know, I've talked about this in the things we learnt from the game. You know, Vicente Gaeta's sitting on the bench in a minute. We've got another class keeper here who's being kept out the side by Wayne Hennessy, which once again just goes to show how good his performances have been of late. But of course, do feel free to comment below with your views about Wayne Hennessy and whether you do think he'll keep the #1 shirt for the rest of the season, because at the moment, if he carries on with these performances, he certainly will do that. So I'm going to move on now to the defence, starting with the right back Aaron Wan-Bissaka. And like I've said previously, the last few weeks, he's been probably up there with one of our sort of top 3 players so far this season. And once again, this was another good performance from him, and I do think he does deserve the 7 I'm going to give him. Now, in terms of his performance as a whole, I think you could look at the first sort of 10 minutes or so and say it was quite a quiet display from him early on in the game. But this has been a theme of many Palace players this season, in the fact that it takes us a bit of time to get going into the game, and certainly that was in Aaron's case, that was exactly what his performance was like, because after that sort of first 10 minutes or so, he grew into the game. And I spoke last week in the fact that his defensive performance was superb, but just to improve it even more, he would have to be more of an attacking outlet down that right hand side. And although he started to do that against Huddersfield with a few crosses into the box, it wasn't superb. And this is something I've been asking from him for the whole of this season, and he's done exactly that against Newcastle, and that's why I've given him a 7 for his performance, because not only was he putting in a good performance defensively, but actually going forward, not only was he proving to positionally be very effective, but in terms of his ability and providing to be the outlet to put balls into the box or to dribble past players on that right hand side. The fact that he was doing that was really quite impressive, and the fact that you're able to combine your defensive duties and still do that well whilst also going forward and proving to be an outlet and just proving to be a player on the overlap, that is something that's really impressive for me, and that's something I've asked for him. I said it last week, I've said it before, and I've said it probably most of the games so far this season that he's played, in the fact that to improve, because his defensive performance is fine, but just to improve, he just needs to be a more attacking or more effective player going forward, and he's done exactly that in his game. But like I've said, I think in terms of comparing his performance to other players in the Premier League, I think you could say that in the second half, obviously, like I've said, his defensive performance was good, but the way he went forward like a top quality Premier League fullback in that second half is something that really impressed me. The fact that he was still able to combine that defensive work rate and the fact that he was still able to go forward and prove to be that outlet really just show the quality that he's got. And of course, he wasn't perfect going forward, because obviously he's young, there's a lot to learn, but the fact that he's still able to make that improvement from last week whilst also maintaining that high sort of defensive performance is obviously great to see as well. And like I've said already, this guy's a fantastic talent, and if he can continue to put in performances like this whilst also on top of that improving his sort of attacking outlet going forward, that's of course going to be great to see as well. Now, I suppose the final point for me to finish on is, I've talked about his slide tackling and his sort of interceptions, but there was one vital interception in that second half, and of course once again it just goes to show that at the key moments, Wan-Bissaka, even though he's young, he's one of our best players because he always shows up when it matters. So the fact that he was able to, do really well defensively, get back and make that vital interception is of course great to see as well. Now, something I mentioned with Hennessy and the fact that we've obviously got 3 clean sheets so far this season. Obviously, you've got to give credit to Hennessy because as the goalkeeper, you make saves, you keep the clean sheet. But also, you've got to give credit to the back 4 in front of him. And I think more people are swaying towards giving praise to the back 4 as opposed to Hennessy, because if you have a good back 4, then your goalkeeper isn't really troubled. But nevertheless, I think Hennessy's got to get a bit of praise in terms of his performances and how well he's improved this season. But also you've got to give you've got to give sort of praise to that back 4, because in them 3 games we've kept clean sheets, the Fulham game, the Huddersfield and the Newcastle game, we've had the same back 4 and goalkeeper, which just goes to show that when you get sort of a stable back 4 and goalkeeper, once you have that stability of having that consistent same lineup, it obviously seems to help your performances. And that was exactly the case here, because although it wasn't the greatest game in terms of quality, the fact that we were able to keep yet another clean sheet with the same back 4 and goalkeeper just goes to show how that combination is working really well. And once again, it just goes to show that actually how important, obviously people like Zaha are important, but it just goes to show that actually our back 4 are as important as Zaha, because obviously they're the sort of the spine of the team, which obviously help us to stay in games and etc. etc. So it just goes to show that actually, although you're going to give praise to Hennessy for the clean sheets, you've also got to give credit to the back 4, because obviously it's the same back 4 that played against Newcastle at the weekend that of course went forth and kept that clean sheet. But overall, Wan-Bissaka here, I've given him a 7 because I think his performance was very good. And like I said, even though his first sort of 10 minutes or so he was fairly quiet, the fact that he grew into the game after that and proved to be an attacking threat down that right hand side whilst also putting in his interceptions and slide tackles, defensively as well. That was of course very impressive. And like I said, and I keep saying it week in, week out, but this guy is a talent, and long may performances like this continue from him. We're going to move on now to the first of our centre-backs, and that is of course Mamadou Sakho. And much like Wan-Bissaka, I thought his performance was very good, and I'm going to give him a 7 overall. Now, to be honest, I think the word to describe Mamadou Sakho is composed, because although he does it every week, I think this sort of performance against Newcastle, where it was a fairly difficult game with not really much quality, the fact that he was still able to be composed at the back and just sort of keep it together whilst we weren't really necessarily having the best of games, just goes to show how much of a quality defender he is. Now, in terms of Newcastle, obviously they haven't had the greatest start to the season, but you've got to look at their team and go, they've got a few good attacking players there, and they've still got a threat going forward. It's not like they're sort of doing completely bad this season, because they've played some pretty tough teams. And of course, Sakho, he was tasked with keeping Newcastle's threat at nothing, or keep it as minimal as possible. And the reason I said he was composed is because he'd done exactly that. His job was to come out and just make sure that Newcastle couldn't really have any chances on goal, and that's exactly what he did, and he limited their chances to very few. And when you look back at the stats, obviously I don't always like to go with stats because it doesn't necessarily explain the game in a full picture, but I think Newcastle only had 3 shots on target. I think they had about 6 shots compared to Palace's 16 or something like that, and they only had 3 of them on target. So although obviously Newcastle had created chances, only 3 of them were on target, mainly because people like Sakho were very composed at the back and done very well to limit their chances, and when they did get the chances, people like Hennessy were on hand to obviously stop it from coming anything. Now, of course, I could talk all day about Mamadou Sakho's performance in the fact that he was very crucial, as was the whole back four and the goalkeeper, very crucial in terms of keeping a clean sheet, but he had Palace's best chance of the game to win the game, but he somehow put that header wide, and you look back at videos, you look back at photos, and you go, how did he miss? Because he had an open goal, and he put his header wide, and the goal was gaping. It was probably easier to score than miss, but obviously he's put it into the side netting. Now, of course, missing a sitter that probably would have won us the game, because it was right at the end. That's obviously quite disappointing, but if you put that aside, you put that mistake aside, which ultimately, I'm not a footballer, but I personally think he should be doing better there. If you put that aside, I do think, you've got to look at his performance and say it was actually really good. And if he had scored that goal in sort of the last few minutes of the game, then I probably would have been looking at giving him an 8 for his performance, because he would have added to his good defensive performance with of course, an important goal that would have probably got us to win the game. Now, to be honest, like I've said already, I'm going to talk a little bit about this, but loads of people are absolutely slating him for that. But actually, if you put that mistake aside, and the fact that he missed that really great chance, and the fact that you've got to consider that he's not necessarily the best header of the ball when it comes to in front of goal. He's obviously good at headering the ball out of danger, so his sort of headering style is just to get the ball away. So you could argue that obviously he's not a striker, he's not as clinical with his headering, so maybe you could sort of maybe give him a break there, because obviously he's not really used to headering shots on goal, but still he probably should have been doing better there. But like I said already, you need to put that mistake aside, because like I said, I've given him a 7 because his overall defensive performance was good. And like I said, in terms of the fact that he was limiting Newcastle's threat, I think one of the main reasons for that is just because he was sort of out-muscling their attacking players. Now, I've said already, Newcastle, yes, they haven't had the best of starts of the season, but they've been playing some difficult teams, and of course, they haven't necessarily been terrible, but obviously in this game here they weren't quite physical enough, and of course players like Mamadou Sakho, James Tonkins, Aaron Wan-Bissaka were basically just sort of out-muscling them out of the game, and like I've said already, limiting their chances, which of course, when you've got a team who are not playing that great, if you limit their chances even further, is obviously going to make it even more difficult for them to get a foothold in the game. And certainly, because of the quality of the game, it did certainly look like that was obviously one of the reasons for that. But once again, just to sort of summarise, Mamadou Sakho, solid defensive performance, but as much as we don't want to dwell on it, you probably should have, you could have and probably should have won the game with that header right at the end. But like I said already, Mamadou Sakho, a good performance from him and deserves the 7. So now I'm going to move on to the second of our centre-backs, and that is of course James Tonkins. Now, although I talked about the back four's performance being quite good, and the fact that we were able to keep the clean sheet, our third of the season, was of course great to see. Of course, James Tonkins wasn't necessarily as good as he was last week, and certainly wasn't as good as his centre-back partner in Mamadou Sakho. So overall, based on that, I'm going to give him a 6 overall for his performance. But in terms of, before I go on to talk about the performance itself, I just want to talk about one moment in the game which was really sort of uncharacteristic of James Tonkins, because we know, much like Sakho, he's normally very composed, but there was quite early on in the game, I think it was Perez who was going through on goal, and Tompkins probably would have been really easy just to take the ball out of the air and either pass it to Sakho or Wan-Bissaka or whoever was nearest him, I can't remember exactly, or would have been able just to clear it. But instead he's tried to control it, and obviously Perez has just got the ball off him, managed to go through on goal, and of course Hennessy was lucky enough for us, was able to make a save. So in terms of the fact that he wasn't able to make a good connection with that shot, Perez is obviously sort of a let-off for Palace, but just go to show that maybe that was just a moment, sort of a little mistake from James Tompkins, which really is uncharacteristic from him, because we normally don't see these types of mistakes from him. And the fact that when a player does that, you could say, yes, Tompkins, you don't normally do that, but we'll let you off. That obviously just goes to show how good he normally is, because other players you would probably criticise for quite a long time when they make a mistake like that. But the fact that Tompkins is normally fairly consistent, we could just say that's sort of just a little bit of a blip. But in terms of the reason he didn't get a 7 or wasn't necessarily as good as, say, Sakho was at the back, is mainly because of little mistakes like this throughout the game, little bits where he wasn't necessarily as composed as he has been in previous games, and maybe that's something that sort of let down his performance overall. Now of course, when you make a mistake like that, you normally get punished, but like I've said already, Newcastle haven't had the best of starts to the season, and whether it was just a confidence thing, or whether it's just the fact that Perez just sort of got it all wrong, whatever it was, we were quite fortunate that he did obviously muck up that shot, and of course Hennessy was able to save that. Now in terms of his second half performance, obviously the first half he was fairly average, wasn't necessarily spectacular, wasn't bad other than that mistake, but going into the second half, once again involved with Perez, obviously took him down for the foul, which ultimately you could say sometimes you've got to take one for the team just to sort of get rid of the attacking threat or get rid of the counter attack. He obviously done that and got booked on quite early on in the game, which of course in the second half, if you get booked, you've got to be careful not to get that second booking. But overall, if you put them sort of two mistakes in terms of giving the ball to Perez in that first half, and of course getting booked for a foul on Perez in the second half, if you actually put them aside and look at the performance as a whole, I think you could say he was fairly good. He wasn't necessarily great, but he was good in the fact that he won plenty of headers, and overall he done a decent job defensively. Now although he wasn't the greatest, he still played his part in getting the clean sheet, which is our third of the season, which of course you've got to give him credit for. And as I said with Wan-Bissaka and Sakho, and obviously Hennessy as well, the fact that we've got these 3 clean sheets and it's been the same back 4 on goalkeeper just goes to show how important they are as a sort of a collective 5, in the fact that we haven't necessarily kept clean sheets without them, which just goes to show that actually it's a very, very good combination which seems to be working. But once again here, I've given James Tompkins a 6 mainly because it was sort of an off day for him. Wasn't necessarily as good as he has been, which is really sort of uncharacteristic from him because he's normally one of our sort of more consistent players, but certainly wasn't necessarily a bad performance. And the fact that he won plenty of headers and, like Sakho, restricted the amount of chances that Newcastle had, that was of course great to see as well. But overall, James Tompkins, not too much to touch about on his performance, but I do think a 6 is a fair reflection of his performance. So we're going to move on now to the final player of our back 4, and that is of course the left back Patrick Vanano. Now I'm going to give him a 7 for his performance because much like Wan-Bissaka was on the right hand side, I think Patrick Vanano had a good game both defensively and offensively, and that's something which we know he's good at because we've seen it last season, but that's something we haven't necessarily seen at the beginning of this season. But the main reason I'm going to give him a 7 is because he was one of our biggest attacking threats, because you look at Will from, he was injured in the warm-up, managed to play the full game, but obviously wasn't himself. And of course, we weren't playing that great going forward because obviously we normally play with Benteke and Benteke wasn't there. So obviously going forward we weren't necessarily as great as we have been because obviously players were not playing that well. So of course it sort of landed on players like Vanano to prove to be that attacking threat, and that's exactly what he did. Whenever we were going forward, he obviously tried to get forward as much as possible and tried to get involved. And of course, like Wan-Bissaka on the right hand side, he just tried to offer a threat down the left hand side, whether that be providing sort of overlaps and 1-2s with people like Wilf, or whether that's just trying to put balls and crosses into the box. Whatever it was, he looked to get forward as much as possible. Now the reason I really want to highlight this point is the fact that last weekend against Huddersfield I said that although he was fairly competent defensively, didn't do anything wrong in the game, I gave him a 6, but the fact that he didn't go forward and didn't really support Wilf was maybe you could argue one of the reasons we didn't necessarily play that great. Obviously we won the game against Huddersfield, but one of the reasons we may not have played great is because going forward the offensive sort of play wasn't really that great from Palace. And you could argue that Vanano, the fact that he sort of didn't attack or didn't go forward as much as he normally does against Huddersfield was one of the reasons why I only gave him a 6. So it's actually great to see the fact that he's managed to see that and see that he wasn't necessarily as effective, and the fact that he was able to bring that into his next game and prove to be that attacking threat we were missing in previous games is of course great to see as well. Now, to be honest, he wasn't necessarily that great in terms of having loads of goal scoring opportunities or getting into the box and getting involved as much as he had done last season, but like I've said, his attacking play was a significant improvement on how he has played in recent games, so of course you've got to give him credit for that. But in terms of sort of that end product or that final ball, it wasn't necessarily there. So although he obviously proved to be that attacking outlet down that left hand side, he probably should have taken a few more shots. So he's often a player who last season, he went in the box, he'd shoot, and quite often he got quite a lot of goals, especially the end of the season. And of course, the beginning of this season, he hasn't necessarily quite been doing that as effectively. And you've got to look back at the game and go, he created loads of lovely opportunities when he went forward, but he just lacked that final ball. And if he had that, whether that be a shot on goal, whether that be a cross into the box to whoever was in the box at the time, whatever it was, it probably would have improved his performance over even better. And let's say he did get an assist from the game, you probably could argue getting a clean sheet, being very good offensively, as well as getting the assist, you probably could have given him an 8 for his performance. But overall, like I said with Vanano, I said last week that he needed to attack more and try and get involved with the attacking plays more. He done exactly that here and tried to get forward as much as possible, which is of course great. And like I've said, like Sakho on that right hand side, he obviously proved to be that threat down that left hand flank. And of course, although he should have had a bit more end product in terms of taking shots, taking crosses, I do think his overall performance was very good, and that's why I do think he does deserve the 7. So we're going to move on now and go on to the midfield, and I'm going to start with the captain, Luka Milivojevic. And this is a player who I did criticise quite a lot, this season, not just last game, but this season, in the fact that he hasn't necessarily playing to the standard he was playing at last season. But actually, this was a performance where he looked to be improving his form, and certainly was a massive improvement on games in the last sort of weeks or so. But in terms of just to start with his performance, and the main reason I've given him a 7, it's just the fact that he was quite often a threat from set pieces, and there was one delivery in particular which he came really close with, which of course hit the post, and I think it did take a slight deflection of Tompkins. Now of course I've seen a few people on Twitter saying that obviously his performance was great and was a massive improvement, but maybe some of his set pieces weren't great. Now you've got to look at both set pieces, so when you've got set pieces from free kicks, I thought in that respect he was very good in the fact that he hit the post. There was one which, I think it was an easy save for the goalkeeper, one that went over. So in terms of free kick attempts, he was pretty good. But in terms of his corners, quite a lot of his corners, one of them I think went out for a goal kick. Another one of them was, just got easily cleared by Newcastle. So I can understand people criticising him for his set pieces, but if you split sort of the set pieces into 2, his free kicks were good in the fact that he came close with one of them hitting the post, but then his set pieces which came from corners weren't necessarily that great. So in terms of his overall performance, yes, that improved, but in terms of his set piece delivery, it wasn't. So it was sort of 50-50 as to whether it was good or not. Now to be honest, I said about his set pieces not being that good, but if you put that aside, I think in terms of being that sort of midfield anchor and getting forward, I did think he delivered quite a good number of balls into the box, whether that be sort of chip balls over the top. Obviously he didn't do that many, but there were a few good ones, and there were also a very few sort of wayward ones as well. So like I've said already, he's slowly improving, and although he's not necessarily as great as he has been last season, the fact that he's still able to improve his performances, and the fact that he's slowly getting better, that of course can only mean good things for us going forward. But the word I like to use about his performance was just assured. The fact that he didn't necessarily look too troubled in the midfield, and the fact that he was still able to go back, do his defensive work, whilst also proving that a threat going forward by delivering the balls into the box. That was of course great to see as well. Now just to touch back on, about a point about the set pieces, is that some of his set pieces were awful at times, like I've said already with the corners, but then other ones were better in the fact that one of them sort of led to us hitting the inside of the post. And that's really a point I want to make, because I've seen quite a lot of people criticise him, especially on Twitter, but I do think if you've got to look at both sides of it and go, yes, some of his set pieces were awful in terms of, the ball going out for throw-ins and going out for goal kicks. But actually, if you look at the other aspect, some of them, the fact that one hit the post, one of them the keeper had to save, if you look at that as well, you've got to say actually it was overall, yes, he wasn't the greatest, but he still, had some sort of impact on the game, and certainly, like I've said already, was better than he has been in different games. Now, or last few games rather. Now, in terms of the final point really I want to touch on, and this is the main reason for me that I've given him a 7, other than the fact that he's just improved on his previous performances, is the fact that he won some important tackles throughout the game. Now, of course, we know with Luka, last season it was just standard that he play in front of the back four, literally provide them with lots of cover, make loads of tackles, and basically just boss the midfield. Now, of course, this season we haven't necessarily seen him play to that sort of level, but in this game here against Newcastle, like I've already said, it was an improvement on previous games, and one of the reasons for that is the fact that he made a number of very important tackles, and that just goes to show that last few weeks, there was one in particular, a goal we conceded a few weeks back, where he sort of tried to tackle the player but just shrugged him off, and he obviously just ran through on goal and scored. And that just goes to show that actually this season he hasn't been that great, because he hasn't had that ability just to make that challenge and stop the player running forth on goal. Whereas this game against Newcastle, the fact that we got the clean sheet just goes to show that actually when you put in a tackle, when you put in a shift for the team, and obviously when you improve your overall input into the game, obviously that can improve your performance as a whole, as an individual, but also it can improve the team performance. And certainly I do think Luka was one of the players, in the fact that he improved his performance, that obviously helped the whole team as well. But overall, I'm going to give him, like I've said, I've given him a 7 for his performance, mainly because it was a significant improvement on last week, and although it wasn't great, and I suppose I say improvement on last week, I suppose it's just an improvement overall of his whole season. But although he wasn't great from some set pieces, some of his set pieces were bad, some of them were good, but I think the main reason I've given him that 7, and overall I think he had a good performance, is just the fact that he made a number of important tackles, because without him sort of shielding the back four, maybe they would have been put under a little bit more pressure, and maybe we could have gone on to maybe concede a goal in the game. So the fact that he was able to sort of be very combative and just looked very assured in midfield, as well as winning these tackles, of course was great to see. And you could argue, as much as the back four and goalkeeper was important for the clean sheet, you've got to say Luka in the midfield, playing in front of them, making them tackles, you could argue with that 7 I've given him, he was just important as them. So I'm going to move on now to the second player of our midfield, and that is of course Cheikhou Kouyaté, who personally for me, I thought he was great last week against Huddersfield, and although his performance wasn't as great here against Newcastle, I still thought he'd done a shift for the side, and that's why I'm going to give him a 6 overall. Now, in terms of, I talked about Luka in terms of him being combative and just being sort of controlling in the midfield. In terms of describing Kouyaté's performance, I suppose you could say that he got stuck in. The fact that he was putting himself about a bit and was just making sure that even though, Newcastle were quite sort of strong and physical in the midfield, he was just making sure that we could get stuck in and just sort of control the midfield overall. Now, although I think that we weren't necessarily great in the game, I think both sides were quite sort of lacklustre, I suppose, in the game. It wasn't a game of real quality. I still thought within the midfield, I thought Kouyaté done a really, really good job of doing that. Now, in terms of the first half, looking at that performance from Kouyaté's perspective, I thought he was one of the players trying to get Palace onto the front foot. Now, although he plays primarily as sort of a central defensive midfielder, alongside Luka, I still thought he liked to venture forward quite a lot. And of course, especially in that first half with Palace, we're trying to put pressure on Newcastle. They're just playing quite deep, they're defending quite well. Because of that, we needed someone to, give us a bit of spark. And I personally thought, within the midfield, I thought Kouyaté was doing that. The fact that he was trying really hard to get involved in our counter-attacks and he was trying to push forward, that sort of I suppose ability and that sort of, I can't really think of the word to describe it, but I suppose the fact that he's looking to get stuck in the midfield and he's looking to try and get involved and help Palace to go forward. I suppose that determination, there you go, there's the word. The fact that he's got that determination to try and go forward and try and help the team going forward, even though he's primarily a sort of a defensive player, that's of course great to see as well. Now, as good as his first half performance was, I thought he sort of faded a little bit in the second half, and of course as a result of that he got taken off, and I think Max Meyer coming off the bench sort of just gave us a bit more sort of fresh legs and sort of more impetus as the game went on. But like I've said already, even though he did fade in that second half, if you're looking at the game overall, and the reason I've given him a 6, it's just the fact that he proved to be a good physical presence. Now, I've said this ever since Palace has signed him, I thought that he would bring a very physical presence to the side, a lot of height as well, because obviously he's a really tall guy, and of course the fact that he likes to get stuck in the midfield with tackles, with blocks, everything like that, I thought would be a good signing for Palace. And certainly in the few games we've seen him play, I think he's certainly proven to be that, and especially the fact that he tried to get forward and tried to get involved in that first half, whilst combining that with his physical presence and his defensive work rate, was of course really good. Now, of course he did get subbed off because his second half performance wasn't necessarily as good as his first half, but the main reason for that was just to sort of give us a more attacking option, because as much as Max Meyer has played as a defensive player last season, he primarily is sort of your attacking midfield player, so of course he came off the bench and certainly just gave us a bit more impetus going forward. But overall, I think Cheikhou Kouyaté had a very good game. You know, wasn't fantastic, wasn't terrible, but still put himself about in midfield and certainly was one of our better players in the first half. But although he faded in the second, I still thought he brought a very good physical presence to Palace. And, you know, obviously there'll be debate as to whether Max Meyer should start or whatever. I do think actually, given Kouyaté's performance and given the fact that Max Meyer came off the bench, I do think that their sort of types of performances could work well together, and I do think maybe a midfield trio of maybe Kouyaté, Max Meyer and maybe Luka as well could work really well, mainly because I thought Kouyaté going forward and defensively was very good, and of course when Meyer came on as well, he proved to be a very good attacking threat as well. So I maybe think he might complement him very well, rather than him coming off the bench to replace him. Maybe I think maybe starting them together may be a better option. But overall, Cheikhou Kouyaté, a 6 for him, a relatively good performance from him. Then we're going to move on now to the final player of our midfield three. Obviously, as we were playing a 4-3-3, which of course I've asked for many weeks now, but we've finally started to start playing this system. And of course, James McArthur, you know, once again playing as our final player in that midfield three, and I'm going to give him a 6 overall for his performance, because, you know, I said last week that I didn't think he was great. Coming into this game, I sort of wanted him to be dropped for Max Meyer, purely based on the fact that I've seen more from Meyer in terms of coming off the bench than I saw for McArthur last week against Huddersfield. Obviously, Roy likes to stick with winning teams, and obviously he's stuck with McArthur, and I've given him the 6 because I thought his performance wasn't great, wasn't terrible, and, you know, much like what I said with Kouyaté, it was sort of a performance where he'd done his bit in the midfield, he'd done his, you know, his job, but he wasn't necessarily as good or as effective as he could have been. Now, in terms of McArthur, within the first few minutes of the game, Townsend whipped in a cross into the box, and obviously McArthur had the early chance. He headed it just over the bar, and of course at the end of the game there was another similar chance where the ball's got into the box and Zaha's crossed. So once again Townsend whipped into the box. Zaha whips it across the face of goal, and McArthur couldn't quite stretch with it. So if you look at them two chances in particular, you know, you've got one right at the beginning of the game where he hedged just over, and you've got one that's right at the other end of the game, right at the end, where he couldn't quite stretch at the right moment to put the ball in, which basically would have been a tapping goal. But nevertheless, he had two fantastic chances for in the game, one at the beginning, one at the end. And obviously, you know, like I've said, one of them went over with the header, another one you couldn't quite stretch enough. So if you're looking at chances and the fact that in the midfield, if you haven't got players in the box, or attacking players in the box, you want your midfielders to make late runs in. The fact that McArthur was doing that, and the fact that he was in and around the box, that was of course great. And that's one of the things I liked about his performance, in the fact that he may not necessarily have been great as we've seen last season, but I still gave him that 6 because I thought within that midfield, the fact that he was positionally always sort of in and around the box and looking to get on the end of chances is great, and the fact that we were creating chances and he was getting on the end of them as well, obviously just goes to show that if you give the service to your players, albeit he's not an attacking player, but if you give service, chances will come. And unluckily for us on them two occasions, in McArthur's case, he obviously wasn't able to finish off them chances. But the reason I wanted to touch on that is just because throughout the whole game, I don't necessarily think he was great, he wasn't outstanding, but the fact that he was a very consistent performer throughout the game, as well as having these two key chances, that's just something I really sort of wanted to mention and touch over. But in terms of his overall team performance, I thought he worked hard, which is, you know, his usual thing, he always does that. And, you know, like what I talked about with Luka and Kouyaté, he was always, you know, willing to put a foot in, you know, to win the ball back. And that's what you want from a sort of a box-to-box midfielder, essentially what he is. Now, of course, got a few free kicks in midfield as well, which just goes to show, you know, if you've got good movement, you're quick on your feet, you can create opportunities, as well as, you know, not just from, you know, getting into the box, but create opportunities from winning free kicks and stuff. So the fact that he was able to do that was great to see as well. But the main reason I couldn't really give him a 7 for his performance is just that I didn't see quite enough of that from him for the whole game. Because like I said, he had the chance at the beginning of the game, obviously played well and worked hard for the rest of the game, and then had a chance right at the end of the game as well. So not really stuff at the beginning, stuff at the end, but nothing really in the middle. Now, the final point really for me, just to finish off, is just that I thought that his passing was neat and tidy. Now, much like what I said in terms of his work ethic, you know, the fact that he always works hard, his passing is almost always the same, you know, very neat, very tidy. And in terms of, you know, controlling the game, and like I've said, although it wasn't a great game, the fact that we had some sort of control in the game, you've got to give credit to McArthur, because if you've got players just giving away possession, obviously you're going to find it more difficult to get a grip on the game. But when you've got someone like McArthur who's so good with his passing, obviously that's going to help you, to get a real control of the game. But overall, James McArthur, I've given him a 6, like I've said already, and I'll keep repeating it because I really want to emphasise it. But he had a good chance at the beginning of the game, had a really good chance at the end of the game, and other than sort of working hard and putting foots in and winning free kicks, there wasn't really too much sort of in between that really did impress me so much. But once again, McArthur is one of our most consistent performers, and this was once again just another consistent performance from him where he done his shift. But overall, I do think that 6 I've given him is a fair result. So we're going to move on now to the first of our attacking 3 players. Obviously, like I said already, playing that 4-3-3 formation, I think it suits our players the best. And certainly, the next player in Andros Townsend was one of these players who, since we've swapped to this formation, seems to have thrived in that role. And, once again, a good performance here against his former club, Newcastle. I'm going to give him a 7 overall. Now, when you consider, you're playing against your former club, sometimes that can affect you. You look at Wilf when he plays against, well, I suppose when he plays against teams that boo him, but when you look at players from former clubs, people like Andros Townsend are always going to get booed by, the people like Tottenham, people like Newcastle, mainly because he used to play for them. But obviously, like what Wilf does, and certainly what Townsend done here again, obviously the home crowd are not really going to like you because obviously you used to play for them or you always perform well against them. And of course, that sometimes can affect players, but I do think in Townsend's case, it didn't really affect him. And even though they don't like him, I still thought he put in a good shift, and that's why I've given him the 7. But in terms of his deliveries from wide, they were very good, and that's something I said last weekend where we weren't necessarily that great offensively against Huddersfield, but I think we would have been better if we put more chances and more balls into the box. Obviously, like I said with a few players, they obviously don't listen to my opinion, but they've obviously worked on it in training last week, because obviously Andros Townsend improved his performance by putting in delivery after delivery after delivery into the box. And although he was creating chances for everyone else, when the chances did come to him, I did think he was sort of wasteful on quite a few occasions, because he was the guy who was supplying numerous good opportunities and good deliveries for other players, but when he found himself in good positions, he couldn't quite take their chances. Now, there was a video I saw on Twitter, obviously you're watching the game and you sometimes miss things because it's the heat of the moment, you obviously don't look back at them, but someone posted a video of one of Townsend's chances. Now, right on the edge of the Newcastle box, he's jinked inside, got past a player, and rather than either making a pass or just trying to sort of accurately shoot it, he's literally just rifled it, so much power, and it's gone out of the stand. So that just goes to show that he gets himself into some good positions sometimes, but he's wasteful when he does that, because that sort of example, that sort of chance in particular, rather than just putting power on your shot, maybe you should just try and be a little bit more, put a little bit less power and just try to be more accurate. So once again, it just goes to show that even though he was providing good opportunities and good deliveries for his teammates, when he got chances himself, he wasn't really that great at making them. Now, in terms of the chances he did create, obviously the Sakho one where he missed the sitter, that was obviously a massive chance, which unfortunately for us, Sakho did miss. But the fact that Andros Townsend was able to put that ball into the box, for someone to get on the end of it, was of course very impressive. And once again, going back to that McArthur chance right at the beginning of the game, once again that came from Townsend, from kickoff, running down the flank and getting a ball into the box. So it just goes to show that maybe a week's worth of training where you're just working on your crossing and getting forward, that can improve your performance so much. And I personally think if someone like Benteke was playing, he probably would have got 1 or 2 goals, purely based on the fact that he thrives on balls into the box, and the sheer amount that Townsend was putting into the box, that was of course great to see as well. Now obviously I talked about one of his wasteful chances, Townsend, but there were a few other ones, one that was saved well by the keeper, early on in the second half. And obviously, like I said already, I've touched on it, that awful shot in the second half. So it just goes to show that although he can supply other players, and I'll keep mentioning it, when he gets chances himself, it's either 50-50 as to whether it's actually going to be on target or whether it's going to end up in the stand, and normally the latter does happen. Now, in terms of my final point that I really want to mention about Townsend's performance, and the one thing that did really impress me in terms of the reason I've given him that 7, is just the fact that obviously Sakho was playing at right back, but I thought Andros Townsend did really cover really well at right back. And obviously that was when Sakho was further up. So I mentioned with Aaron earlier in the fact that he was more adventurous going forward and he was creating chances, which of course is what I've asked him to do, and I've said to improve his performances, that's what he needs to do. He obviously done that, and occasionally, because you're playing slightly further forward, you're obviously going to leave a bit more space in behind. And even though that was the case, and it wasn't terrible, in the fact that Wan-Bissaka left space. It's just the fact that sometimes you leave a bit of space, and I think that Townsend done really, really well in terms of covering at right back. And you know, that's what you expect from a winger. You know, we used to see this with Wilf, and we obviously still see it with Townsend, in the fact that they come back and help the fullbacks, and you know, just making sure you have that extra layer of defence and protection. And that's obviously great to see. And you know, other than the fact that Townsend's sort of attacking contribution on the game, one of the other reasons I've given him that 7 is the fact that he covered at right back. And you know, obviously it isn't, if you defend well, you shouldn't have to have wingers who are coming back and helping you defend. But when you have the system we have, where you've got your fullbacks overlapping, sometimes there's going to be space, and luckily for us, Newcastle didn't exploit it, but sometimes that can happen. But the fact that we've got someone like Townsend who's aware that not only he can go forward, but he can also go back and defend and help his fullback as well as, you know, having a good partnership with Wan-Bissaka down that right hand side, that's obviously great to see as well. And overall, I do think his overall sort of attacking performance was good, but the fact that he added just that little bit of defensive support as well down that right hand side, that was of course great to see as well. But overall, Andros Townsend, you know, probably one of you know, considering it was a day where Wilf was quite quiet, arguably you could say Townsend was one of our best attacking threats on the day. And overall, I do think he does deserve that 7 I've given him, considering the sheer amount of good deliveries from wide he put into the box throughout the game. So we're going to move on now to obviously our other winger, because playing that 4-3-3 system, it means that Wilf, rather than sort of being wasted up front, he now has that freedom of playing out wide but drifting inside as well. Now in terms of his performance, you know, I talked about Townsend being one of our best attacking threats. That ultimately means that Wilf had a slight off game, and for that reason I'm going to give him a 6 overall. Now of course, before I go on to talk about his performance, you know, there was a scare about half an hour before the game where he went off the pitch during the warm-up and then came back out again, then he went back in again. So obviously there was a bit of speculation as to, because he looked like he was carrying an injury, something, I think it was sort of the back or the top of the back or bottom of the neck, that sort of area, it looked like he had an injury. And of course that was quite disturbing, because you know, we know that we don't win without Wilf, and of course losing a player of his ability isn't great. But luckily for us, he did start the game, but it did show in his performance, in the fact that he didn't look himself, especially in the early stages of the game, and that's probably because he struggled with that back problem that obviously he had during a warm-up. Now of course, a player like Wilf, you know, sometimes you have players who are so good that maybe injuries won't affect him, or anything really won't affect them. But of course, in Wilf's case here, he did seem to struggle quite early on in the game, probably because he was still nursing that injury. But after sort of probably first sort of 10 minutes or so, where he started to, you know, get the freedom down that left hand side to run past the fullbacks or to run, you know, up against them, once he started getting that, he caused lots of problems for the Newcastle defence. Now, although he didn't carry that sort of usual threat he has in terms of just running at them full pace, when he eventually sort of got into the game after he sort of overcame that injury, he started doing that. And the fact that I think it was the right back for Newcastle, the fact that he got booked obviously gave Wilfried Zaha the freedom to run at him, because he didn't, obviously the defender didn't want to risk, you know, making a tackle and getting sent off. So of course the fact that Wilf caused him problems then resulted in him getting a booking, obviously just goes to show how that once he got into the game, he obviously could have an impact down that side. Now of course, like I've said already, clearly he wasn't 100%, but the fact that he was still one of the best players on the pitch just goes to show the quality he has. And I say this nearly every week, you know, when he scores, that most of the games that he scores, he may not necessarily have been great. Sometimes he's just not necessarily, he's been pretty average, but still, to show his quality, he pops up with a goal. And that, once again, you look at some of the best players in the world, and sometimes they may have an off game, but the fact that they're so good, they can still pop up and still get a goal. And obviously, although we didn't see that in Wilf's game here, the fact that he was still one of our better players, once again, just goes to show that even when he's having a bad game, he can still be one of our best players on the field. Now, in terms of my final sort of point overall, and the main reason I've given him a 6, and this is a point I've seen a few people talk about online, it's just the fact that people felt, and including myself, that he sort of overplayed at times. So we know that he's, you know, full of trickery, full of pace, but there were a few times within the game where, rather than, you know, just doing a simple thing, run at a defender, get the ball into the box or cut inside, he was just sort of trying to be too clever, just overplaying it. And although he still had some moments of sublime skill, there was just a few moments where I thought he was trying a bit too hard, and ultimately nothing really came off the back of it. But to be honest, I personally think, looking back at the game, it probably would have been better to see him just take a few more shots on goal, because given his quality, you know, as we saw last week against Huddersfield, he can shoot from almost anywhere, and the goals, you know, the shots can go in. So maybe that's something to criticise him on. Obviously, we can understand that he was carrying an injury, so he may not have been 100%, but maybe, much like what I said with a few other players, you know, just take a few more shots. You know, if you get a chance on the edge of the box or inside the box, rather than just trying to sort of look for a clean shot, just hit the ball. Because if you sometimes, you know, especially with Newcastle playing as deep as they did, sometimes you can get chances in the box where there's so many players, it's so overcrowded that you know, you take a shot inside the box and no one will know where it's gone. So maybe that's something that Wolves should consider into the next games, in the fact that if he's not going to be that great, you know, at least just take all the chances you can get, and maybe sort of go over and just sort of, yeah, basically, if you're going to have a bad game, just at least try to create as many chances or take as many chances as you can. Now, I do realise I'm just talking and just sort of repeating quite a lot of the stuff, but this is the thing with Wolf. You know, Wolf's is such a good player that when he does have an off game, there's certain things you can pick out from his performance, and certainly if he was full of confidence, wasn't carrying that injury, I'm probably 90% sure that he probably would have taken more shots. But that's just something to pick up about his performance, in the fact that it was quite obvious to see he's not that great, probably because of the injury, but it's also, there's certain things you can pick out from his game when he's not having a good one. And, you know, one of them I've picked out personally is the fact that he probably should have taken a few more shots on goal. But overall, Wilfried Zaha, not a terrible performance, obviously not as effective as he usually is, but I do think a 6 is a fair reflection of his performance. So I'm going to move on now to the final player and our striker in that 4-3-3 formation, and that's of course Jordan Ayew. Now, I talked last week in the fact that he was probably arguably one of our better players in terms of replacing Christian Benteke, and he worked really well last weekend. And, you know, quite a lot of people, once we heard Benteke was out for the weekend, most of us were quite hopeful in the fact that Ayew could continue his form from last weekend. Now, even though once again he played in the absence of Christian Benteke, he didn't quite have that same impact as he did last weekend against Huddersfield. Maybe that's just because Newcastle have they're very physical at the back, you know, physical defenders. Maybe it's just because they made him look isolated at times, and for that reason, I'm going to give Jordan Ayew a 5 overall. Now, in terms of his overall performance, you know, I said that he looked isolated at times, so that's basically sort of the theme of his overall performance throughout the whole game. And although he was linking up quite well, you know, with our front three in terms of, you know, getting balls to Zaha, getting balls to Townsend, and the fact that he was obviously using his pace to get forward, I just think because that Newcastle were defending quite deep, it just made him quite isolated at times. And, you know, I talked about Townsend putting deliveries into the box. When you consider McArthur was probably one of the most likely players to get a headed goal in this game from Townsend's chances, just goes to show that how isolated the forward Ayew was, in the fact that midfielders who obviously meant to be playing for slightly deeper than the striker, the fact that they're getting more chances just goes to show that maybe Ayew wasn't necessarily as good or effective as he has been in the past. Now, in terms of a moment in the game sort of to pick out, you know, obviously he was fairly quiet because he was isolated, but in the first half, even though he's not the tallest player, he had a header just over the bar in the first half. So once again showing that, yes, he may not be the greatest, but the fact that he can get into the box and get in the end of opportunities is of course great to see. Now, in terms of his overall performance, you know, I talked about this with Cheku Kouyaté, but Ayew was once again one of these players who became a little bit more ineffective as the game went on, because I thought in the first half he sort of defended from the front and sort of helped us to sort of not go behind early on in the game, because like I've said already, the quality overall from both teams was pretty poor. So obviously the most important thing was just to not concede, so I thought Ayew was quite important in that. And of course, like I've said already, he won headers, and obviously his mobility, the fact that he can run past players, was an asset. But obviously he wasn't quite as effective as he has been in recent weeks, and of course he was quite ineffective as the game went on. But overall, Jordan Ayew here, you know, considering Benteke might be out until sort of mid-October, Ayew's got to take his chance, otherwise someone like Sorloth will come into the side. And, you know, I've given him a 5 for the performance here. You know, I don't think it was bad, in the fact that he obviously still won headers, and because he's got that mobility, he's able to get past players. But I just don't think he was quite effective as he has been, especially when you consider how good he was against Huddersfield last weekend. I just think if we had seen a little bit more sort of running with the ball from him, a little bit more of his pace and ability and agility, I suppose, maybe it would have been an overall better performance from him. But Jordan Ayew here, Obviously on loan from Swansea, I'm going to give him a 5 overall for his performance. So I'm just going to move on now to the substitutes. Obviously we made 2 subs in this game, and for the first time this season we've actually made a sub before the sort of 90th minute. We obviously brought on Max Meyer for Cheikhou Kouyaté in the 62nd minute, which of course we were all crying out for. I personally thought maybe someone like McArthur would go off, but of course Kouyaté was the guy to go off. And of course Alexander Sorof as well came on for Ayew in the 71st minute. So before I go on to talk about the performances of these substitutes, I've got to say Roy Hodgson, I criticised him last week for leaving it too late, and I did argue that actually maybe he left it late because he didn't want to change the formation or change the team too much, because it seemed to be working, and you know, if you change it drastically to try and win the game, it could of course backfire. So I understand that a little bit with Roy Hodgson, but he seemed to be getting a little bit arrogant in the fact that he was making late substitutions. So obviously it was a nice surprise when he made early substitutions in this game here. Now in terms of the 2 subs, obviously Max Meyer came on for Kouyaté. I'm going to give him a 6 overall, because when he came on he obviously impressed, and he's done that in every game he's played so far for Palace. And of course, because he came on earlier than he has done in past games, it gave him more time to obviously make an impact on the pitch. And of course, we were lacking some sort of creativity and sort of guile in the sort of latter stages of the game. So the fact that Meyer came on and actually injected that into the side and just gave us that little bit more creativity is of course great to see. And it does beg the question as to why he didn't start the game, because I know Roy Hodgson likes to stick with a winning side, but it just does beg the question that if you've got someone like Meyer who can come off the bench and give us creativity, it does beg the question as to why he didn't start the game, because with his creativity for the whole 90 minutes, or even if he did play 60 minutes and then Kouyaté came off the bench for him, even if he played that sort of time, I think he could have had a little bit more impact on the game. Now in terms of just his overall playing, and the main reason I've given him a 6, I thought he was very neat and tidy on the ball, which you would expect from a German international player who's obviously played in the Champions League. And the fact that he's got the creativity, combining that with neat and tidy passing, that's of course great to see as well. And the fact that he, you know, quite a few times he was playing nice through balls forward, especially one to Townsend. But obviously Townsend couldn't quite help Palace to break the deadlock. But the fact that, you know, Meyer came on and actually was creating chances for people like Townsend, once again goes back to that point about creativity. The fact that he came off the bench and just gave us more creativity going forward. But obviously there was one moment himself, obviously I talked about him creating chances for Townsend. There was one moment where rather than shooting himself, he probably should have, he should have obviously took the shot himself as opposed to passing to Townsend. So you could argue that although it was a nice through ball to Townsend, maybe the better option would have been for himself to shoot. So depends which way you look at it, but personally for me, I do think maybe it would have been a better option for him to shoot, because as we've seen by what he's done at Schalke and obviously playing in the Champions League, so you've got a quality player here, he obviously does seem to have the quality to shoot, so maybe it would have been a bit nicer to see him do that. And of course Alexander Sorof came on for Ayew. Not really going to give him a rating because he was given sort of 20 minutes to make an impact, but he didn't really have that much influence in the game. Not many sort of chances fell to him, and because sort of the whole team was sort of pushing up, people like McArthur, people like Max Meyer were pushing into the box, it basically meant that even though, you know, Sorof was that sort of focal point of the attack, because we had other players getting involved, it really sort of meant that although he was playing up front, all of the other players around him were also trying to be an attacking influence. So really when you're the focal point, obviously you would expect chances to come to you, but when you're the focal point but then other players are getting involved as well, it obviously sort of limits what you can do. But then some could argue, and I know people don't really like Sorof, they say he's not good enough. I think give him time and he may turn good, but obviously if you're looking at this game, maybe you could argue that maybe he should have seized his opportunity more and done more in the game. But then the way I look at it, I'm thinking, actually, given the short amount of time he had and the fact that the rest of the team were sort of pushing up, so it's not really he was the focal point of the attack, so you can't really expect everything to come around him. Because of that, I don't really think there could be too much blame on him, but I do certainly think that I can't give him a rating for his performance overall. And now in terms of just an overall summary of the game, like I've said in the introduction, and I'll go on to talk about this later on when I talk about the man of the match, but I do think it was a poor game. Obviously that was just in terms of the quality from both sides. Obviously it was a poor performance from Palace, and although we did obviously dominate a quite awful Newcastle side, it just goes to show that actually sometimes it's just better to, rather than sort of trying to win the game and you end up losing, I'd rather draw, than not get any points at all. So I've heard many people say that, including Luka Milivojevic. He basically said after the game, I'd much rather, you know, put in a good performance but get, you know, 1 point from the game and just get a draw, as opposed to putting in a good performance and getting nothing from the game. So although it was a very poor game, you know, and obviously poor performance from both sides, I do still think it was a good sign that, although it was, like I said, a bad performance, it was good that we were able to dominate our opposition for the rest of it. Now, this does beg the question as to whether Roy Hodgson should make changes, because as shown in this game, the system wasn't quite working up until, you know, it took a bit of time for it to get working, and certainly considering the subs we brought on, especially Max Meyer, maybe he should have been starting, because that sort of change maybe could have seen an upturn in our performance from us. Now, to be honest, I've seen a few people saying Meyer should start. I personally do agree with that, and I sort of think Sorloth as well, because I think that he should be given a chance to play in the absence of Benteke, because although I think Ayew is a good player, I think Ayew was brought in to play as part as a 4-4-2, but because we've changed back to a full sort of a 4-3-3 formation, I think someone like Sorloth would suit that better, because I think Ayew is more sort of a player who can play off another striker in a 4-4-2 and obviously run in behind, as opposed to Sorloth, who I think in a 4-3-3, being that focal point, being that man up front at sort of single striker, I think he'd be more effective there. And of course he'll play against West Brom in the week, in the Cup, and hopefully he'll score another goal there. But I think he needs to be given a run of games, not necessarily just in the starting 11, but maybe just coming off the bench a bit earlier, because we want to see whether the problem with him is just that he hasn't got the ability, or whether he just needs to play in a system which suits him, and he sort of just needs a bit of time to just sort of adapt to the Premier League. Now, of course, he's young, and I know people have written him off already, but we can't write him off already, because people are writing him off too easily at the minute, but we haven't necessarily seen enough of him to clearly say. Some could say in the games he's played, you can argue, yeah, he hasn't been that great, but we haven't seen enough of him to say exactly whether he's good or not. So I personally think, alongside Meyer, maybe someone like Sorloth should start, because I personally think he's more suited to that 4-3-3 formation as opposed to Ayew is, because I think, like I said, Ayew's better in a sort of 4-4-2 formation. But my final point really to finish off before I move on to the man of the match is just on the plus side, you know, it wasn't a great performance. Obviously, you know, it's not great when you sort of have games which are scrappy like this, but on the plus side, you know, we're now 7 points off than we were at this stage last season. Obviously we went winless in 7, so the fact that we've got 7 points after 6 games, which is just above a point a game, that's of course great to see as well, and hopefully we can make that 10 points against Bournemouth next week. And although Bournemouth, you know, they've started the season quite well, I think they got beat this weekend, so maybe there's an opportunity there next week that if we make a few changes and improve our performance, then of course we can go there and hopefully get 10 points, which would be great. Obviously 10 points after 7 games, but nevertheless, even though this wasn't the greatest performance, it obviously was a crucial point we got in the game, so can't really argue with that. And as loads of people have said, I'd much rather, you know, get a point from the game as opposed to none. So I'm now going to move on to my man of the match award, but before I do that, I give you my man of the match and who I thought the biggest influence in the game. I'm now going to give you the 4 nominations I put forward for the award. Now, looking back at the game, and arguably, as you've probably heard in the player ratings, it was pretty poor quality game in the fact that Newcastle were quite poor, Palace were quite poor, and although the performance from Palace was quite poor in the fact that we had loads of chances and we didn't take them, it was still quite a lot better than the game against Huddersfield last weekend. So if you want to look at it in that respect, well, obviously it's a good thing because we're going in the right direction in terms of improving our performance. Now, of course, the performance weren't great, and you could argue it's quite difficult to pick out players to put on this shortlist, but there are 4 players I picked out who I personally thought, for me personally, looking back at the game, I thought that they were better than obviously everyone else, but I thought they just gave a little bit more when compared to other players throughout the game. Now, of course, we did dominate the whole game, and that's why I think really if we had taken a few more chances, we could have easily won the game. But because Newcastle were quite awful, the fact that they just parked the bus against us, it's like, why not attack us and actually try and beat us as opposed to just sitting back and looking for the draw? So whatever it was with Newcastle, and maybe with Palace as well, and the fact that we couldn't break them down, it obviously was quite a poor game and quite a poor spectacle in that respect. But as per last weekend, you know, against Huddersfield, we didn't really perform that great, but there were still a few standout players, and certainly that was the same sort of theme here. So the 4 players I've gone with is Aaron Wan-Bissaka, Mamadou Sakho, Andros Townsend and Patrick Van Aanholt. So the reason I've gone with these players is for a mixture of reasons, but you know, it's mainly because, like I've said, they stood out for me. They just gave a little bit more than, let's say, some other players did on the field. Now, in terms of Wan-Bissaka, he started the game quite slowly, as you've probably heard in the player ratings, But after that sort of first 10-minute spell where he was getting into the game, he was absolutely superb. And then especially in that second half where it looked like, we know how good he is and we know how good he's played in the Premier League, but he's looked like, once again, he's been in the Premier League for years. He looked like a top quality fullback, what you would expect from, you know, top level clubs, in just the way he went about his game both defensively and offensively. So the fact that he was able to act like that, especially when going forward, that was of course great to see as well. And it's great to see that I personally have criticised him in the past for not being that good offensively, and now the fact that he's adding that to the game is just adding to that quality he's got, and it's just making him an even better player. So that was the main reason I've put him on the shortlist, is the fact that not only was he superb defensively in terms of making vital interceptions in after that sort of first 10 minutes of the first half, and of course the second half as well, but actually going forward as well, he was looking like a top quality player. Mamadou Sakho is one of these players who people are going to look back at the game and go, his miss, he could have won us the game with that terrible miss. And ultimately, yes, he probably should have done better there. But I think overall, as a defensive performance, I think the back four done relatively good. And when you consider the few chances that Huddersfield, I keep saying Huddersfield, but the performance that Newcastle had, the chances they had, and it was, I suppose you could mention Huddersfield, because it was a very similar performance to Huddersfield, where yes, they had a few good chances, but our back four were able to deal with it. So I suppose I accidentally dropped the Huddersfield name in there, but I suppose you could actually link it to this game in the fact that both teams were quite similar, in the fact that they were quite wasteful with their chances. But actually I thought Mamadou Sakho done a very good job of that. I thought he was very composed at the back, and obviously considering Newcastle have got a little bit of threat up front, I do think he limited their threat alongside James Tompkins. So I think overall a very good performance from him. And you know, although people are going to keep talking about that terrible miss at the end of the game, you've also got to look at his defensive performance before that and actually go, he was quite good in the game. Now Andros Townsend, obviously playing against his former club, he was a player that surprised me, because the last few games, although he's been constantly, you know, getting fives and sixes, he's been quite consistent this season. Not necessarily great, but he's been consistent. This was a performance where, this was the game really, before the performance. I just thought this was a game where it might go one of two ways. He'd perform really well, obviously against his former club, or he's going to play bad, because obviously sort of the impact of playing against your former club, that sometimes affects you. But here, didn't seem to affect him, and he put in a really good performance, and arguably was one of our better players. Now the thing that I liked about him is the fact that he was putting in these deliveries from out wide, and although he was a bit wasteful when he himself got into some good sort of goal scoring opportunities, the fact that he was creating chance after chance after chance for other players is obviously great to see. You know, you look back at the game and go, within the first 2 minutes he's putting across to McArthur, which he's just headed over. You've got another one towards the end of the game where the ball comes into the box, and you know, that's the one for Sakho. So not only was, you know, Townsend just being a threat down that left hand side or down the right hand side, because he played on both wings in this game, not only was he doing that, but the amount of deliveries, and they weren't just deliveries aimless in the box, these were proper good deliveries into the box. So the fact that he was able to do that, and arguably one of our biggest attacking threats considering Wilf was having a slight off game, the fact that he stepped up and was able to create chances for his teammates was of course great to see. Now the final player I want to talk on, and I normally do this in position order, but obviously I've decided just to change it up and put a defender last on my shortlist, but that is Patrick Van Aanholt, of course. And the main reason for that, much like what I said with Tompkins and Wan-Bissaka, he was obviously one of our key players going forward. I think whenever possible, whenever there was chance going forward, he was going forward. And actually last week I sort of criticised him because he weren't going forward, he weren't necessarily supporting Wilfried Zaha too much. This game was a complete opposite, that although we weren't great overall as a team, we did see improvements in players' performances like Van Aanholt, because whenever he had the chance he was looking to go forward. And I lost count really looking back at the game how many, you know, 1-2 passes he was making with the likes of Zaha and Ayew. So the fact that he's able to offer us that threat down the left, as well as obviously being quite integral to us keeping our second consecutive clean sheet, that's of course great to see as well. Now obviously, just to sort of summarise, I think all of these players do deserve to obviously be mentioned here. You know, Wan-Bissaka, Sakho and Van Aanholt for their defensive performances and obviously helping us keep that clean sheet. And of course, you know, you're looking at Wan-Bissaka, Townsend and Van Aanholt as well for just providing us an attacking threat when you consider it was quite a poor game, poor performance from quite a lot of the players. The fact that we still had players like this who were still able to pose some sort of threat was of course great to see as well. Now personally for me, I think it was quite a hard decision, because when you have a performance like this and it's really hard to pick out players, And, you know, when you do pick out a group of good players, it's quite hard to pinpoint who exactly was the best. But I am going to give it to Aaron Wan-Bissaka, so congratulations, Aaron. You win another man in the match, and I think I've lost count of how many of these you've won. But I think you've only played about, 14, 15 games now for Palace in the first team. And the fact that you've been on the shortlist nearly every week, and the fact that you've won quite a lot of them, just goes to show how much of a talent you are. And once again, the fact that you've got it here just highlights what a good performance it was. But the main reason I'm going to give it to him is mainly because of how much he's improved and what I've asked for him for, the last few weeks. I've asked for him to obviously improve his defensive play and obviously get more involved going forward, as well as obviously being so good at making slide tackles, making interceptions. So whilst that may affect some players and they try and do one thing and it affects their other, Wan-Bissaka's still been able to defend whilst venturing forward, and that's the main reason I've given it to him. And, I'm still going to give notable mentions to Sakho, Tompkins, and... Sakho alongside Tompkins, but obviously Townsend on the wing and obviously Vanano as well. Obviously you've got to give them credit, but you've got to look at Wan-Bissaka and go, his performance was very good throughout the game, both offensively and defensively. And, you can't give any discredit to the three other players I've named, but I just think Wan-Bissaka just sort of shone for me a little bit more than them other players. But do comment below with your thoughts, and of course if you do disagree with my man of the match or even my shortlist, then of course do feel free to get in contact, and obviously, like I've said, if you've got a different opinion, then of course drop it below. So now you've heard my match report, player rankings and my man of the match. That concludes this week's podcast. Now I've got interviews with Roy Hodgson, Andros Townsend and Luka Milivojevic following the game.
Andros, 0-0 draw today, but is it fair to say that Palace were the more dominant of the two teams?
Yeah, I think we were. We created loads of chances. Probably should have, could have won the game, but it's just one of those days again where nothing would go in for us. We'll take the point. We have to take the point and move on to the next game now.
For you personally, if you got points for creating chances, you would have scored quite well today. It was the Maka one and then Sakho's as well. Did you think that was in?
Listen, I've had a chance as well. I think a lot of the attacking players had chances to score today, so we're not just going to blame it on one or two players. Everyone had chances and nobody took them. So at the end of the day, we weren't clinical and we didn't get the 3 points that we did deserve.
But at the back, fairly comfortable. Was a strong performance from the defence.
Yeah, of course. I think if you take a scoreline out of it, it was a strong performance in defence and going forward as well, the midfielders, the strikers, the wingers. But we're in a results-based business. We didn't play well last Saturday, but got the 3 points. We play well this Saturday, but didn't get the 3 points, and that's the way it goes, unfortunately. Yeah.
So performance-wise, do you feel like it's progressing? That was one of the best of the season so far, I guess, in creating chances.
Yeah, of course. On the one hand, we have to be positive. We have to take the performance, the positives into the next game, and remember how well we did play. But on the other hand, it's a missed opportunity. In the Premier League, you can't be creating 7-8 chances and not scoring. So we have to learn from that. We'll work hard again on the training field this week, and hopefully next Monday we can create the same chances but put them away this time.
We missed, especially second half, many chances. First half we hit the bar. I think we deserve 3 points. I'm very happy how we played over 90 minutes. We were compact, we had good organization, we moved the ball quickly, we created a lot of chances, but in the end we missed, I think, 5 minutes until the end, 100% chance. And okay, in the end we took a point. We're not happy, but when you cannot win, then don't lose. And in the end we draw and take a point.
You certainly pushed hard towards the end. I mean, you'd hit the post in the first half of that free kick, but Mamadou, Sakho, I guess, think, I should have scored there with that header right near the end.
He wants to do the best, and in the end he missed. Maybe the goalkeeper in the end missed the ball. That's maybe reflect on his... maybe he didn't kick the ball how he wants. But okay, as I said, we draw and we continue to try to improve in the next game.
Well, it's 7 points from your first 6 games, which is a considerable improvement on last year, and I suppose that's the way to look at it, isn't it?
Yeah, I think we start this season very well. After that, we had 3 defeats. Maybe first 2 was unlucky. Third one is against Southampton, which we didn't want to lose. But then against Huddersfield, we won. Today, I think, it's the most important for me was today clean sheet. We played very nice game, and we can take a lot of positives from this game, I think.
Roy, frustrating afternoon for you, really. You asked more questions than Newcastle, I would say, over the course of the game, but you only get a point.
Yeah, but these things happen. You know, these games occur during the course of a season. I thought it was important that we kept playing the way that we wanted to play right the way through, that we didn't panic at any time. Newcastle defended extremely well. They worked very hard, got players back behind the ball. I thought obviously that during the 90 minutes it was us who had far and away the best chances, and towards the end of the game we're looking the far more likely team to score. But the bottom line sometimes is that when you don't get that goal and when things don't quite go your way, that you don't suddenly start losing all of your discipline, losing all of your team shape, losing all of your organisation, and then you end up losing it 1-0, and then you've got nothing to cling to. We've got a lot to cling to today because it was actually a good team performance. I think that I can't really fault anybody throughout the 90 minutes, and that's good to be taken forward into the coming games.
Clearly, at the end of the game there, Mamadou Sakho looked very upset as he just made his way straight off the pitch. It's a great chance. There's no hiding the fact it was a great chance. Yeah,
he's disappointed with himself there. I mean, an outstanding game. I thought the two centre-backs were really good right the way through. So it would have been quite fitting, really, after the performance to win it for us. And then, of course, that one in the last minute, which just eluded someone as it skidded across the goal mouth. But the bottom line is that Newcastle came here with a game plan. They came here to make it very difficult for us and to deny us space and to cut down, if you like, on the way that we want to play. So you have to give them credit for that. But I don't think we could have done an awful lot more today, other than the obvious, take one or two of those goal chances which would have won us the game.
A recurring theme in the game, I think, was perhaps the quality of delivery from Andros Townsend. From the very first minute, he put in an absolutely great ball. And then, of course, it was his ball for Sakho at the end.
Yep, no, he actually had a good game today. Wilf was quiet, but I fear that's of his own making to some extent. You know, it's not been a good week for him with all the discussions and all the, what's the word really, the polemic really over the interview. And I thought today that's the quietest I've seen him for a long time, and that's disappointing because, you know, Wilf in high form today I think might just have been the difference. But as I say, credit to Newcastle for the work they put in. I'm certain they'll be more than satisfied with the fact that they got a draw here, and we'll be disappointed and a little bit frustrated, but by no means downhearted, because if we can keep playing at that level of football, both home and away, we'll get the points we need to stay in the league.
I read your programme notes, Roy, when you were saying, you know, the best thing that Wilf can do is to beat defenders and make them pay by scoring goals or creating goals. Do you perhaps wish with hindsight that he hadn't come out and said what he said?
There's no point in having hindsight that helps you at all. I think, as I said in the press conference yesterday, I think people are entitled to say what's on their mind. I don't think we should be trying to put I'm thinking of a Swedish word, munkjävel, what do you call that, that you put on dogs?
A muzzle.
A muzzle, sorry. I couldn't think of the English word. I don't think we should muzzle people. I think, you know, he obviously said what was very much on his mind, in his heart. I think he's paid for a little bit today because he was much quieter, much more subdued than we have seen him in the past. But I don't think one should be constantly criticising people for saying what's on their mind. There was no question whatsoever that we as a club or he as a player were trying to influence the referee or gain an advantage. That was never a case at all. But of course, every time someone comes out and says something where there is an element of controversy, it will be jumped upon, and there's so many people today writing and commenting, and there'll always be different opinions, and as a result we've had a week, if you like, of Wilf Zaha and should he, shouldn't he, and I'm pleased that that's behind us now, and we can prepare for the next games and get Wilf back into the flying form that he normally shows.
How many languages do you think in, Roy?
No, not many. It's just an unusual word, isn't it? I don't know quite why that word, suddenly the word came to me, and for the life of me I couldn't pluck out the English one, but it's not very often that happens.
Thank you, Roy. Really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
So there you have it. Now you've heard what Roy Hodgson, Andros Townsend and Luka Milivojevic had to say after the game. That concludes this week's podcast for the game against Newcastle. But make sure to come out next week for my post-match review of the game against West Brom in the Cup. So thanks for listening, and remember to up the Palace.